South Korea, a country known for its beauty, calm streets, and polite culture, was shaken to its core by a crime so disturbing that even the police struggled to comprehend it. A 23-year-old girl, Young Yoo-jung, who appeared ordinary, polite, and quiet, turned out to be someone far more sinister than anyone could ever imagine. What drove her from being a lonely student to a cold-blooded killer inspired by fiction and web novels? This is not just a crime story. It's a horrifying journey into the dark corners of obsession, loneliness, and the blurred line between reality and imagination. Today, you'll hear the complete story, from the beginning to the end, of the Young Yoo-jung murder case. A story that South Korea will never forget. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because every week we uncover the darkest real-life mysteries from around the world. Now, let's dive into the chilling beginning of this case. It all started with silence, the kind of silence that hides screams behind walls. Young Yoo-jung was a 23-year-old student who barely left her room. She lived in Busan with her grandparents after her parents' separation. Her world was small, a tiny bedroom, a glowing laptop screen, and countless web novels about murder, detectives, and perfect crimes. For most people, fiction is an escape. For Yoo-jung, it became a seed that grew into obsession. She spent hours every night reading stories about revenge, dismemberment, and clever killers who escaped justice. The more she read, the more her reality blurred. In her online chats, she often pretended to be someone else, sometimes a victim, sometimes a criminal. The line between what if and I could began to fade. She wasn't satisfied being just a reader anymore. She wanted to experience the story. Her grandparents noticed the change. She slept during the day, stayed awake at night, and rarely spoke. But they thought it was just her being young, addicted to the internet. They didn't know that their quiet granddaughter was already planning something horrifying. Inside her browser history were searches like how to hide a body, how to clean blood, and how to steal identity. One evening, she joined an online tutoring app under a fake identity. She wasn't looking for lessons. She was looking for prey. Through that app, she found a 26-year-old English tutor, a cheerful young woman who loved teaching and believed in kindness. Yoo-jung studied her profile, her photos, her habits, every detail. To her, the tutor was no longer a human being. She was a character in the story Yoo-jung was about to write, with real blood. In May 2023, Young Yoo-jung created a fake student profile pretending to be a high school girl. She texted the tutor, acting innocent, saying she needed help preparing for a college entrance test. The tutor agreed to meet her in person for the first lesson at her home. Yoo-jung smiled, and the story had begun. She bought a school uniform online, just to look younger and less suspicious. That night, she stood in front of the mirror wearing the uniform, her long hair neatly tied, her eyes cold and distant. She looked like a teenager, but her heart was dark, pulsing with anticipation. She whispered to herself, "Tomorrow I'll know how it feels." It wasn't excitement. It was hunger, the kind that only ends when the story turns red. The next morning, the streets of Busan looked peaceful under the soft sunlight. No one could have guessed that somewhere among those quiet alleys a nightmare was waiting to unfold. Young Yoo-jung woke up early, wore her freshly ironed school uniform, tied her hair neatly, and checked her backpack. Inside it, hidden under a notebook, was a sharp kitchen knife. Her heartbeat was calm. Her steps were slow. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind so many times that it already felt familiar. When she arrived at the tutor's neighborhood, she paused for a few minutes, pretending to scroll through her phone like a normal student. The tutor had sent her address and instructions politely the night before, even reminding her to eat breakfast before coming. That kindness made her heart twitch for a second, but only for a second. As soon as the tutor opened the door and smiled warmly, Yoo-jung's mask of innocence slipped perfectly into place. The tutor's apartment was small but cozy, books neatly lined up, soft music playing in the background, and a faint smell of coffee filling the air. "Come in," the tutor said with a gentle tone, unaware of the darkness she was inviting inside. Yoo-jung stepped in, pretending to be nervous. She placed her bag on the table, smiled shyly, and began to chat like any other student would. The tutor had no reason to doubt her. How could anyone imagine danger coming from such a calm face? Minutes turned into an hour. They began with simple English phrases, a light conversation about hobbies, dreams, and travel. Yoo-jung answered softly, her eyes fixed not on the tutor's face but on the movement of her hands, the distance between the table and the kitchen, the angle of the door. She was studying, but not language. She was studying the scene of her story. Every second was a calculation, every smile was part of her act. Then suddenly the atmosphere shifted. The tutor went to pour a glass of water, her back turned for a moment, and that's when Yoo-jung stood up quietly, her hand sliding into her bag. The metal of the knife was cold against her fingers. Her breathing slowed, her mind filled with a single thought. Now. She walked closer, her reflection visible on the polished glass of the kitchen window, and in that moment, fiction finally became reality. A single scream echoed through the small apartment, sharp, brief, and filled with disbelief. The tutor's voice cut through the air and then was swallowed by silence. Yoo-jung stood still for a second, staring blankly, as if she couldn't process what she had done. But then her expression changed. Fear turned into focus. The story had reached its turning point, and she was no longer a reader. She was the author, writing her masterpiece in crimson. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The cheerful home that once echoed with soft laughter now stood frozen in a moment, soaked with horror. Young Yoo-jung stared at the floor, her chest rising and falling steadily, as if her body already knew what to do. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. She walked toward the door, locked it carefully, and turned around with a cold, calculating look in her eyes. This was the part she had imagined over and over, the part where the story continued even after the scream stopped. She dragged the tutor's body toward the living room, careful not to step in the growing pool of blood. Every movement was slow, quiet, practiced in her mind 1,000 times. She had watched videos, read crime stories, memorized instructions, how to clean, how to hide, how to become invisible. The sound of her own breathing filled the room. For her, this wasn't a nightmare. It was a mission. A dark, twisted mission she had created for herself. Then she opened the backpack she had brought. Not just a school bag, but a carefully packed crime kit. Inside were gloves, a change of clothes, plastic bags, and cleaning wipes. She put on the gloves slowly, as if putting on armor, and kneeled beside the body. For a moment she looked at the tutor's peaceful face, now drained of life. There was no hatred, no emotion, just an eerie calm. It was as if she had removed the humanity from the situation completely. She began wiping away the blood, wrapping objects, picking up anything that could leave traces behind. Every small detail was planned. She had even worn shoes with no patterns to avoid footprints. The smell of iron filled the air. The room that once felt warm now felt like a cold, empty crime scene. Yoo-jung moved like someone following a script. There was no hesitation, only precision. Hours passed as she worked in silence. She dismembered the body using tools she had brought, placing each part carefully into plastic bags. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply kept going, her mind somewhere far away, maybe still in those web novels where this kind of scene was just another chapter. She cleaned the floor with disinfectant, wiped the surfaces, changed clothes, and tied her hair back. Her reflection in the mirror looked like a different person entirely. When she finally looked at the clock, it was already late afternoon. She gathered the bags, checked every corner of the apartment, and whispered to herself, "It's perfect." That single line sounded like something out of a storybook, but this wasn't fiction anymore. She opened the door slowly, stepped outside into the peaceful daylight, and disappeared into the crowd, carrying a secret that would soon shock the entire nation. The sun was starting to set when young Yoo-jung stepped outside, carrying the plastic bags hidden inside a large suitcase. The sky glowed orange, the air smelled faintly of rain, and around her, people walked past without noticing the strange stiffness in her posture. She looked like any other student heading home after class. No one could have imagined that inside that ordinary suitcase lay the remains of a young woman whose only crime was kindness. Yoo-jung kept her head low, her face blank, her mind eerily quiet. The story was not over yet. It was just changing scenes. She took a taxi toward the outskirts of Busan, choosing a route she had memorized days earlier. Every movement was part of her plan, from the bus schedules to the secluded paths near the riverbank. As the taxi rolled through the dim streets, she gazed out the window, her thoughts wandering between guilt and fascination. She wondered how real killers in novels felt after their first crime. Did they feel empty? Satisfied? She couldn't tell what she felt, only that she wanted to finish what she had started. When the driver asked if she needed help unloading the heavy suitcase, she quickly smiled and shook her head. "It's just study materials," she lied, her voice soft and trembling, the perfect disguise. As soon as he drove away, she stood under the flickering streetlight, her heart thudding calmly. The river was only a few meters away, dark and still. She dragged the suitcase along the rough path, the sound of wheels scraping against stones mixing with the distant croak of frogs. It was a sound she would never forget. At the riverbank, she paused. The night breeze was cold against her face. She opened the suitcase slowly and stared at what was inside, a gruesome truth that no story could ever justify. For a moment her hands trembled. She almost couldn't move, but then she forced herself to continue. She placed the plastic bags into the dark water one by one, watching them drift away. Each splash echoed like a whisper, disappearing into the night. She didn't cry. She didn't look away. She only whispered, "No one will ever find you." Afterward, she wiped her hands, zipped the empty suitcase, and looked around. The world was quiet, unaware. She checked her phone, deleting chats, erasing call logs, removing every trace of her fake identity. She even texted her grandparents, saying she'd be home late because of tutoring. The perfect alibi. Her calmness was terrifying. It was as if she believed she had rewritten reality. To her, this was no longer murder. It was just another successful ending to a story she had imagined. As she walked back toward the main road, streetlights flickering above her, she felt a strange emptiness inside. For the first time, there were no voices in her head, no excitement, no thrill. Only silence. But in that silence, she didn't know that the story she thought she had ended was only beginning. And soon, every lie, every step, every breath would be uncovered. 2 days later, the bright calm of the tutor's small apartment turned into an eerie silence that no one could ignore. Her mother had been calling repeatedly, sending texts that were never answered. It wasn't like her daughter to go silent. She was always punctual, always responsible. When the calls kept going to voicemail, worry turned to panic. The mother tried contacting the students she usually taught. All replied that they hadn't heard from her. But one name on her schedule stood out, a new student who had only recently booked a session. A girl named Yu Jung. The tutor's mother reported her daughter missing to the police that very night. Investigators arrived at the apartment the next morning. The first thing they noticed was the unsettling stillness of the place. Nothing looked broken or chaotic, just too clean, almost unnaturally tidy. On the desk, lesson notes still sat open, a coffee mug half finished, and her phone charger plugged in but empty. It looked like she had simply vanished mid-conversation. But detectives have a special instinct, the kind that senses when something doesn't add up. And here, nothing did. Meanwhile, back in her grandparents' house, Yu Jung sat quietly at the dining table, pretending to scroll through her phone. She watched the news playing on the small TV. The headlines flashed her victim's face under the words, "Missing tutor from Busan." Her chest tightened for a moment, but not from guilt, from fear of getting caught. She turned off the TV quickly and went back to her room. On her desk were 2 phones, her real one and the fake one she used for the crime. She stared at them, then picked up the fake phone and broke it in half. One more piece of evidence, gone. The investigation team traced the tutor's last online contact through the tutoring app. The name Yu Jung appeared on the final appointment. When they tried to contact her profile, the account had already been deleted. But the system still stored her messages, location details, and profile photo. Though the photo wasn't clear, it was enough to raise suspicion. The police contacted the app company, who provided her IP address. It led directly to Yu Jung's neighborhood. The story she thought she had erased was already resurfacing. The next day, police visited her home. Her grandparents, unaware of anything, politely invited them in. When they mentioned the missing tutor, her grandmother frowned and said, "Oh, our Yu Jung met a teacher recently." She said it was just a lesson. The detectives looked at each other. They asked to speak with her, and when she entered the room, her hands were trembling slightly. "It's about my English teacher?" she asked, trying to sound calm. But detectives notice what ordinary people miss. The stiffness in her body, the way her eyes avoided contact, the slight delay before answering. The questioning went on for an hour. Yoo-jung said she only met the tutor once, that she left early because she felt unwell. But small cracks began to show in her story. Her timeline didn't match her phone's GPS records. She couldn't describe the tutor's apartment properly. And the most chilling clue came later, when investigators checked CCTV footage from nearby streets. There she was, clearly visible, dragging a heavy suitcase out of the apartment complex that same day. The truth was unfolding, and the mask she had worn so carefully was about to crumble. When detectives reviewed the CCTV footage frame by frame, their blood ran cold. There she was, young Yoo-jung, dressed in her school uniform, dragging a suitcase that looked far too heavy for a small girl. The timestamp matched perfectly with the day the tutor went missing. The suitcase was dark blue with scuff marks along the edges. The same suitcase was later seen again in footage near a riverbank hours later. The evidence was undeniable. They now knew exactly who their suspect was, and that the missing woman was no longer alive. The police surrounded her house quietly the next morning. Yoo-jung was still asleep when they knocked on the door. Her grandmother opened it, smiling politely until she saw the group of officers. "Is there a problem?" she asked, confused. Moments later, the detectives walked into Yoo-jung's room, a dim space filled with stacks of novels, scribbled notes, and her laptop glowing faintly. On the screen were open tabs: crime scene cleanup, famous murder mysteries, how to hide identity. When she woke up and saw them, her expression froze, not in shock, but in realization that her story had ended. The officers asked her to come with them, calmly explaining that she was being taken for questioning. She didn't resist. She stood up, dressed herself quietly, and followed them outside. Her grandparents looked stunned, asking what was happening, but she said nothing. The walk from her front door to the police car felt endless. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, whispering. The quiet girl who always stayed home was suddenly the center of every gaze, and no one could believe what they were seeing. At the station, the interrogation began. At first, she denied everything, claiming she only met the tutor once for a short class. But when detectives showed her the CCTV footage, her breathing changed. Her voice grew smaller. They pressed further, showing her messages, the deleted account records, the taxi logs. With each piece of evidence, her wall of lies began to collapse. Finally, after hours of silence, she whispered the words no one expected to hear so soon. "I killed her." The confession came slowly, emotionlessly. She described every detail: how she planned it, how she wore the uniform, how she cleaned the scene, how she disposed of the body. Her tone was cold, almost detached, as if she were describing a movie she had watched rather than something she had done. The detective sat frozen. One of them said later, "It was like listening to someone read a script. No regret, no anger, no tears." She even admitted that she was inspired by crime stories she had read online and wanted to see what it would feel like to do it for real. When news of her arrest broke, the entire country fell into disbelief. Social media exploded with outrage and horror. How could a young woman with no history of violence turn into a murderer just because of fiction? The tutor's family collapsed in grief. Her mother cried in front of cameras, saying, "She killed my daughter just to satisfy her imagination. She ruined so many lives." And somewhere, in a cold police cell, Jung Yoo-jung sat alone, quiet again, staring at her hands, as if she couldn't quite tell whether she was still in a story or finally facing reality. Inside the police headquarters, investigators began to piece together the chilling puzzle that was Jung Yoo-jung's mind. Her confession had been emotionless, her words disturbingly precise, but the detectives wanted to understand why. What could turn an ordinary young woman into someone capable of such horror? When they searched her laptop, they discovered the terrifying truth: thousands of bookmarked crime novels, chat histories where she pretended to be both detective and killer, and entire folders filled with screenshots from forensic documentaries. It wasn't just an interest anymore. It was a full-blown obsession that had consumed her completely. As the officers scrolled through her messages, a pattern began to appear. She had been visiting online forums for months under multiple fake names, asking questions like, "What does it feel like to kill someone?" and "How do murderers get away with it?" She even discussed methods of body disposal with strangers who thought she was simply researching for a story. Every word she had typed looked harmless at first, but now, in hindsight, every question felt like a warning no one had noticed. She had been practicing for this moment all along, writing her own version of a perfect crime. In one hidden folder, detectives found a disturbing set of handwritten notes scanned from her private journal. Pages filled with drawings of knives, maps of the Tudors neighborhood, and phrases written over and over again. Curiosity is stronger than fear. It was that line that sent chills down every investigator's spine. Yu Jung wasn't driven by revenge or hatred. She was driven by curiosity. The act itself was an experiment. She wanted to feel the story she had read so many times. It was as if fiction had swallowed her sense of humanity. The investigators called in psychologists to evaluate her. The initial reports were haunting. They described her as intellectually detached, emotionally flat, and socially isolated. One psychologist said she had absorbed fictional violence as emotional reality. She didn't see people as people. She saw them as roles, as characters in her own imagination. When asked why she chose that specific tutor, she calmly replied, "She looked kind." That made it more interesting. That single sentence silenced the entire room. Her cruelty wasn't fueled by anger. It was fueled by fascination. As the investigation deepened, more horrifying details came to light. CCTV footage confirmed every step of her crime. DNA from the victim was found on her clothes, traces of blood inside her backpack, and the victim's belongings hidden under her bed. Yu Jung didn't even attempt to destroy everything. It was as though part of her wanted to be caught, to be recognized, to make her story known. Investigators started calling her the novelist killer, a term that spread across headlines and horrified the entire country. Meanwhile, her grandparents sat outside the interrogation room, trembling in disbelief. They kept saying the same thing to reporters. She was such a quiet girl. She just read books all day. But sometimes the quietest ones hide the loudest storms inside. The detectives had seen many criminals, but none like her. No rage, no guilt, just a haunting emptiness. And as the case files grew thicker, one question remained unanswered in everyone's mind. Was Yu Jung born evil, or did fiction create her? The courtroom was packed on the morning of Yu Jung's first hearing. Journalists, law students, and curious onlookers filled every seat, waiting to see the girl whose face had dominated every headline in South Korea. When she walked in, escorted by 2 guards, the room fell silent. She looked fragile, almost childlike, her long hair covering part of her pale face. There were no tears, no expressions of fear or remorse, just a blank stare, as though she were still lost in the story she had created. Cameras clicked rapidly, but she didn't flinch once. It was as if she didn't see anyone around her. When the judge asked if she understood the charges, murder, desecration of a body, and evidence tampering, she nodded quietly. Her voice, when she spoke, was flat and emotionless. "Yes, I understand." The prosecution began with the facts, the planning, the messages, the fake account, the weapon, the body disposal. Each detail painted a picture darker than the one before, but what shook everyone the most was the motive, or the absence of it. She hadn't killed for money, revenge, or rage. She had killed out of curiosity, to know what it felt like. That single statement echoed across the courtroom like thunder. Her defense attorney tried to argue diminished responsibility, claiming she was psychologically unstable, detached from reality due to years of isolation and obsession with crime fiction. Psychiatrists presented reports describing her as a high-functioning sociopath with severe detachment from empathy. But when the prosecutor asked Yu Jung directly why she did it, her calm reply made even the judge fall silent. She said, "I just wanted to understand what people feel when they die. I thought it would help me write someday." That line didn't sound human. It sounded scripted, rehearsed, chillingly matter-of-fact. The victim's family sat in the front row, their faces drenched in tears. The mother couldn't look at Yu Jung. She whispered prayers under her breath, trembling as the details were read aloud. When the victim's photo appeared on the screen, smiling, alive, full of dreams, the contrast was unbearable. Reporters later wrote that it was the moment the entire courtroom collectively exhaled, realizing the sheer scale of what had been lost. A bright, kind woman had died simply because someone else wanted to feel something. As the trial continued, Yu Jung's behavior remained the same. No visible emotion, no reaction to testimonies. When the prosecutor described how she dismembered the body, she simply stared at her hands, expressionless. When asked if she regretted it, she paused for a moment and said softly, "It was wrong, but I already did it." You can't delete a story once it's written. Those words sent a chill through everyone present. It wasn't remorse. It was resignation, the acceptance of a story's final page. By the end of the trial, the nation was divided between anger and disbelief. Some blamed her obsession with fictional violence. Others blamed isolation and lack of psychological help. But everyone agreed on one thing. She represented a terrifying truth, that sometimes the monster doesn't look like one. The prosecution demanded life imprisonment, saying, "She ended an innocent life for amusement. She must never be free again." The judge nodded slowly, knowing that whatever sentence he gave, the scars of this crime would haunt South Korea forever. The day of the verdict arrived under a heavy sky, the kind of cloudy stillness that seems to hold its breath before a storm. The courtroom was once again full. Reporters, law students, the victim's family, and even strangers who had followed the case from the beginning. They all wanted to see the end of this story that had haunted the nation for months. Jung Yu Jung entered quietly, her hands cuffed, her face hidden behind her long dark hair. She didn't look at anyone. The clicking of cameras echoed like raindrops in the silence. The judge began to read the decision slowly, his voice steady but weighted with emotion. He recounted the horrifying details of the crime, the planning, the deception, the brutality, and the chilling lack of remorse. Each word was like a hammer striking stone. He said she had shown no empathy, no humanity, and no understanding of the value of life. He spoke of the victim, a woman who had dedicated her life to helping others, taken away in the most senseless way imaginable. And then he paused, looking directly at Yu Jung before delivering the words everyone was waiting for. The court sentences the defendant, Jung Yu Jung, to life imprisonment. The room filled with gasps, murmurs and cries. The victim's mother broke down, clutching her chest as tears streamed down her face. Some people wept with relief, others simply stared in disbelief. The weight of justice felt both heavy and hollow, because no punishment could truly balance what had been taken. The cameras zoomed in on Yu Jung's face, waiting for a reaction, but she didn't cry. She didn't look angry. She simply bowed her head slightly as if acknowledging the end of her story. It was as though she had already known how it would end all along. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before being taken away, she lifted her eyes for the first time. Her gaze was empty, her voice soft but clear. "I ruined everything because I wanted to feel something real. But now I don't feel anything at all." The courtroom froze. Those words, quiet and emotionless, echoed in every corner. Even the most hardened officers later said they felt a chill crawl down their spine. It was not just a confession, it was a window into the void that lived inside her. As guards led her out of the courtroom, flashes from cameras filled the air like lightning. She didn't look back, didn't glance at the crying family, didn't even blink as the doors closed behind her. For the first time, the world seemed to understand the depth of her emptiness. A life that had devoured its own humanity, leaving behind nothing but a shadow of curiosity turned to evil. The reporters wrote that she walked like a ghost, leaving her own story. Outside, as rain began to fall, the victim's mother whispered through tears, "My daughter was real, but that girl lives in fiction." Those words captured the heartbreak of the entire nation, the cruel irony that one woman's love for stories became another woman's death. And though the case had reached its legal end, the questions it raised would haunt every reader, every parent, every lonely soul behind a screen for years to come. Months after the verdict, South Korea was still haunted by the name Jung Yu Jung. News channels continued to revisit the story, podcasts dissected every detail, and parents began watching more closely what their children read and watched online. The case had become more than a murder. It had become a mirror, showing a society struggling with loneliness, obsession, and the digital escape that sometimes turns into a trap. The quiet girl who once hid behind fiction had become a symbol of what happens when imagination loses its boundaries. In prison, Yu Jung lived in silence. The guards said she never caused trouble, never spoke much, and spent most of her time reading or staring out of the window. But what she read now wasn't crime fiction. It was law books, psychology journals, and occasionally the Bible. Some believed she was trying to understand herself. Others thought she was simply searching for a new story to live inside. But no matter what she read, one truth remained. She had crossed a line that no story could erase. Her name, once meaningless, now stood as a warning. A story that would never be forgotten. The victim's family struggled to rebuild their lives. Her mother began a foundation in her daughter's name to help young tutors and students stay safe when teaching privately. Every interview she gave carried the same message. Evil hides behind ordinary faces. Always be careful who you let into your world. Her pain became her purpose, and through her voice, thousands of people remembered the woman not as a victim, but as a kind soul who believed in education and light. The world needed to remember her name, not the one who took her life. The case also led to changes across online tutoring platforms. Identity verification became mandatory, background checks strengthened, and for the first time, lawmakers discussed the psychological dangers of consuming violent fiction without guidance. Experts warned that loneliness and obsession could warp reality, especially when mixed with uncontrolled curiosity. Jung Yoo-jung's story became a tragic reminder that sometimes the real danger isn't in the story we read. It's in the emptiness we carry when the screen turns off. Reporters who visited Yoo-jung years later said she had grown quieter, thinner, and distant. When asked if she regretted what she did, she only said, "Regret doesn't bring people back. It just stays." That line became one of the most quoted phrases in documentaries about the case. Short, emotionless, but painfully true. She was a girl who wanted to feel alive, but in doing so, she destroyed everything that made life human. Her story ended where it began, in silence. And as we close this story, ask yourself, what makes someone cross that line between imagination and reality? Can loneliness twist the human heart that far, or was she always destined to become the monster she admired in fiction? The truth may never be clear, but the lesson is, stories are powerful. They can save us or destroy us, depending on how deep we go. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week we'll uncover another dark, true mystery that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature. Until then, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that look just like us.